Affect Autism, 10 years and counting, committed to autism advocacy, empowering you with DIR floor time. Welcome to the We Chose Play podcast. As we celebrate 10 years of Affect Autism, let's revisit some of our older blog posts, giving them a fresh update. In this episode, you'll hear a renewed version with updated insights and new perspectives. Let's dive in. You're listening to the We Chose Play podcast from Affect Autism, where affect is the #1 tool we use in supporting development through playful interactions. Season 1, Episode 2, The D in the DIR Model, Development, September 24th, 2015. This post is about the D in the Developmental Individual Differences Relationship-Based, or DIR model, the functional emotional developmental capacities, or FEDCs, for learning. There is a lot written about childhood development, but only the DIR model describes it in terms of functional emotional developmental capacities. These capacities are likely different than any you've seen elsewhere because they are based on affect. They are the foundation of the DIR model in the context of safe, loving, and nurturing relationships. Dr. Greenspan describes even more developmental capacities, but it is the first 6 that we are most concerned with. Typically, babies progress through these capacities into early childhood, but children on the autism spectrum can progress through them differently and/or much later. The capacities beyond these first 6 are more advanced and happen into the teenage years and adulthood. There is a link to the CDC revision of developmental milestones if you'd like to have a comparison. The good news is that anyone can continue to develop through their lifetime. There is no rush in floor time. It is also important to note that moving through the capacities is not linear. You don't necessarily master one and move on to the next, and then master that and move on to the next, and so on. This is why we now refer to them as functional emotional developmental capacities rather than levels in the model. More common is that children have holes in the early capacities of development as they move forward through the later capacities, and these holes are always something we are working on. We'll talk about this a lot more going forward. Below are the first 6 developmental capacities, as described in the book Engaging Autism by Dr. Stanley Greenspan and Serena Weider, PhD. Capacity 1, self-regulation and interest in the world. As Dr. Greenspan says in Engaging Autism on page 31, an infant, quote, connects his emotions to his actions and sensations, unquote. This means that the child is calmly showing interest and responds purposefully to sensory input such as the sight of their mother, the sound of their mother's voice by turning their head, the touch of their mother's hand on his or her skin, or the movement of an object in front of their face, etc. In typically developing children, this begins in the first 3 months of life. In children with developmental differences, this may be challenging for a variety of reasons. As babies, they may find certain sensations unpleasant, thus they don't attend to them and might cry or seem unresponsive. As older children, we might learn that a child cannot tolerate loud noises or certain types of material against their skin, or certain textures of food, for instance. When a child is unable to take in information from their senses and feel at ease and focused, it will be a challenge to interact with others. So in DIR floor time, the goal is always to find ways to help the child feel at ease so they can attend to their environment. For some of our children, this might mean being very animated and active because they might be under-responsive. For others, it might mean moving and talking more slowly and quietly because they are naturally so overstimulated. We will talk more about this next blog post when we get into the I in DIR, individual differences. Whatever it is, we have to find the ways to give our children that feeling of safety. This is up to us to do because we know our children best, and it is our mission to ensure that our child is available, at ease, and interested so we can also support and facilitate their developmental capacities. At the blog post, there is a link for tips on facilitating this capacity. Capacity 2, engaging and relating. In this capacity, a baby has a gleam in their eye for their primary caregiver. They smile and respond to the mother with facial expressions. Infants learn to distinguish caregivers from others and inanimate objects. In typically developing children, this begins at age 2 to 5 months old. In children with developmental differences, the child may have these developing intimate feelings for their caregiver, but have difficulty expressing it in ways that we understand, so the caregiver may in turn respond less to the seemingly non-responsive baby. In this case, the interactions between caregiver and child will be more brief, and unlike typically developing children, the child will take less initiative in interacting. This can be an ongoing difference for children as they get older, and we notice it when we try to get their attention or have a conversation. They may just seem unavailable to us, or it may appear that they don't even notice us. This is usually not the case, though. Their biological systems, as discussed in the next blog post about the I, or individual differences, may simply be making it too hard for them to engage in a way we are familiar with. Note that we're always aiming for back and forth interactions while working on shared attention and engagement by relating with an individual. That is, we aren't working only on one capacity, but all at the same time. The important point about this capacity, and DIR floor time in general, is that we want the initiative and desire to come from the child, so we would never force the child to look at us by moving their face in our direction, for instance, or saying, "Look at me." Rather, we entice children into engagement by using affect, so they want to. We do this by following their lead or following their emotional intent through what is emotionally meaningful to them, even if it's something that seems simply meaningful to us, like rubbing a spot on the floor, for instance. The DIR model assumes that all behavior is communication and purposeful. Click on the blog post link for tips on facilitating this capacity. Capacity 3, intentionality and two-way communication. Here we start to see a baby respond with interactions using eye contact and gestures such as grabbing a pacifier from the caregiver's hand. The caregiver and the infant exchange signals with one another for a reason such as smiling to get a smile in return. Infants are able to let the caregiver know what they want using gestures and signals. They may grunt with delight while reaching their hand out when they want something the caregiver is holding, for instance. They are also starting to perceive a spatial world as they watch an object fall and are forming a sense of me versus you and a sense of reality. In typically developing children, this capacity begins at age 4 to 10 months old. In babies where the sensory affect motor connection is a challenge, they may only be capable of very brief interactions. They find it difficult to express their needs without screaming or crying. Thus, their behavior may be more impulsive and unpredictable. When a bit older, they may hit another child to get what they want because they can't figure out how to use their eye contact and emotional signaling to show the child they want a turn, for instance. Rather than initiate interactions, the child will mostly respond to caregivers. In DIR floor time, we try to work on the back and forth interactions while we support the child's regulation, shared attention, engagement, and relatedness with us. It can be done, though, when we follow what the child is most interested in, because this is the window into their emotional world. When we are good observers, we can join them in that world and playfully entice them into these back and forth exchanges, or circles of communication, as Dr. Greenspan liked to call them. Click on the blog post for tips on facilitating this capacity. Capacity 4, complex communication and shared problem solving. FEDC 4 is a big developmental process for any child, but especially for those with developmental differences. It is at this capacity that many things start to happen. A child will begin to figure out that if they want a toy that is up on the shelf, they have to pull mommy's hand to get it for them. That is, they are now using FEDC 3 to problem solve. There will now be 3 or 4 steps towards a goal. The child develops a pattern recognition before language, which leads to language development and scientific thinking later on as they figure out cause and effect. They also see patterns within themselves and others, such as being able to be happy sometimes and also being able to be sad at other times. Even more at this capacity, the child will be able to tame their emotional outbursts because they can signal back and forth to understand that a look from mommy means that the food is coming in a minute, for instance. In typically developing children, this capacity begins at age 10 to 18 months old. In some children with developmental differences, this capacity can develop much later or be quite challenging. Many parents miss the importance of this capacity because their child has good receptive language and can even recognize numbers or letters. They might read, but don't fully comprehend what they are reading. But even with these skills, some children are unable to maintain sustained ongoing interactions, 30 or more back and forth exchanges, and are unable to socially problem solve even if they can independently problem solve. At this capacity, we need to see the children have joint attention with their caregivers, which does not necessarily mean eye contact, in order to figure out a problem together. We need to see that they initiate an interaction with a goal in mind and signal back and forth with you to solve the problem of getting that goal achieved. A child who struggles with connecting their affect to their motor skills will tend to give up if faced with a challenge and move on to something else rather than persist. They are not forming these types of pattern recognizing skills. They might stick with the behaviors they are familiar with instead. Many autistic children struggle at this capacity and remain stuck if those around them struggle to connect with them. But in Dr. Greenspan's clinical observations, his team found that through meaningful emotional interactions, children can reach this capacity with support. Click on the blog post for tips on facilitating this capacity. Capacity 5, using symbols and creating emotional ideas. At FEDC 5, children begin to engage in pretend play with emotional themes and show their imagination. They interact with their caregivers and peers in their pretend play because they understand symbols. We see their creativity emerge as they share new ideas. Children use words meaningfully so that when they say apple, they understand the experience of eating an apple rather than just having memorized a symbol apple to mean a round, typically red fruit. In typically developing children, this capacity begins at age 18 to 30 months old. Children with developmental differences may have difficulty attaching needs and emotions to actions and words, according to Dr. Greenspan, and struggle with this capacity, so it might happen much later. It is common in DIR floor time to hear that children show islands of capacities. So a child might have islands of ideas or pretend play, but there are holes in the earlier developmental capacities. The goal is to continue to support the earlier capacities by supporting the child's capacity to be at ease and attending to, engage and relate, supporting the back and forth until that gets cooking, as Dr. Greenspan liked to say, and until you can keep the circles of communication going to solve a problem together. That is, we wouldn't start playing at FEDC 5 with a child if the first 4 capacities are not yet present, because they would not yet be developmentally ready for symbolic play. Click on the link at the blog post for tips on facilitating this capacity. Capacity 6, logical thinking and building bridges between ideas. Here at FEDC 6, the meaningful ideas from FEDC 5 are linked together. In typically developing children, this capacity begins at age 30 to 42 months old. Typical toddlers can know and express that they want to do something because of some reason, such as wanting to go outside to play. They can answer WH questions: who, what, when, where, why. At this capacity, children now understand that one event can lead to another across time and space. In the book, Engaging Autism, Dr. Greenspan used the examples of someone knocking something over, or mommy not being here now, but being close by. Children might also distinguish between what's inside of them, such as fantasies, versus reality. Again, we might see islands of FEDC 6, despite the child functioning in earlier capacities most of the time. Click on the link at the blog post for tips on facilitating this capacity. Our goal is to support the holes in the earlier developmental capacities. These first 6 capacities are typically mastered by typically developing children by the age of 4 or 5 before they start school. In children with developmental differences, it can take much longer. Even if you're later rather than early, you can still make great strides using DIR floor time in supporting your child through these developmental capacities. Side note, the Rebecca listener on the capacities. Tune in to a brief podcast about the early developmental capacities described from the Rebecca School in Manhattan by clicking on the link at the blog post at affectautism.com. Beyond the first 6 capacities of development, the book Engaging Autism lists 3 more emotional capacities that children would ideally reach into their teenage and early adult years. FEDC 7, Multiple Perspectives. In this capacity, you can think of more than one reason for why something happens. Perhaps my friend didn't want to play with me because he was busy or because I ignored him last time, for example. One can also compare why one likes something or someone more than another, and understand that there is more than getting your own needs met. As Dr. Greenspan puts it on page 51 of Engaging Autism, at this capacity, you, quote, must be able to invest emotion in more than one possibility, unquote. FEDC 8, Gray Area Thinking. Here one will understand degrees of feelings, events, or phenomena. One now can compromise because you understand that there are different reasons for things and differing levels of importance of some things over others. Some examples are feeling only a little bit mad today, or realizing that your math test is more important than your soccer practice, and why. FEDC 9, Reflective Thinking and an Internal Standard of Self. In theory, this would develop in early adolescence when a child forms their own set of morals. One can understand that what is acceptable for one person is not acceptable for themselves. One can reflect that they are feeling angrier than they felt yesterday about something. They can take 2 perspectives at the same time. There's also links at the blog post to hearing Dr. Greenspan talk about FED 7, 8, and 9, Functional Emotional Developmental Capacities through the Lifespan. Click on the link at the blog post for the document describing FEDCs 1 through 16 compiled by occupational therapist Virginia Spielman, PhD. Now that you understand the functional emotional developmental capacities, we can talk about where your child is developmentally, how to meet them there, and how to help support them through each of the capacities. In the next few blog posts, I will start to focus on each capacity in more depth, but first we will move to the I and the R in the DIR model, individual differences and relationship.
Until next time, here's to choosing play and experiencing joy every day.